I've been working as security for just under 5 years now, but last week was the first time I'd been called in to do some patrols around a cemetery. The locals of a good-sized town that I can't mention the name of for obvious reasons were upset as graves had been getting robbed nightly for almost 2 weeks prior, and at a city meeting they'd agreed to hire a security guard to catch the culprits. Truthfully, I'd heard of this kind of stuff before. A buddy of mine had once been called to guard a gravesite as some teens had watched a YouTube video on how to rob graves and were getting their jollies putting their new knowledge into practice. So I expected to face a similar situation in this case. I'd assumed I'd just march around and get to scare the daylights out of some troublemakers, all while being paid for it. Much more relaxed than some of the other jobs I'd worked on, I thought. Come the night of my first watch, nothing was particularly eventful. I patrol with my flashlight and stun at the ready. I'm not allowed to carry an actual firearm, since I'm not technically police and have no actual powers of arrest. I can shock the nuts off a runner and detain suspects until the police arrive, but that's about it. The place was quiet anyway. Just me and the dead folks, and they weren't raising the dead with any parties, so it was a slow night. Towards the end of my shift, I did come across some fresh footprints cast in soft earth that were about the size of a young person's. They were bare footprints, which was a little odd, though ultimately I assumed, since I never saw or heard anyone, that they'd seen me walking about and decided that tonight wasn't the night to try anything. In this line of work, that's not uncommon. Just the appearance or presence of security is usually enough to scare off troublemakers. The next couple of nights on the job followed a similar pattern. I walked around. Everything was quiet and still, as it should be. I'd usually find 1 or 2 footprints in the dirt from kids deciding better of their delinquency. However, as the fog of morning started to roll in on the 5th night, I found myself getting a little spooked. On more than one occasion, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned just in time to see the grass slowly springing back into position, or the mist swirling, but ultimately, there'd be nothing there. Still, I called out a warning to the air, just in case. "You kids better get out of here. You know disturbing graves is illegal. If I catch you, you'll go to jail for the rest of your lives," I threatened. Now, you won't really go to jail forever over it, but depending on the state and the judge, the penalties for grave robbing still aren't exactly fun. I waited a long moment, straining my ears to hear if there were any sounds of people fleeing the scene, but all was silent. Unnaturally silent. Not even the early morning birds could be heard. Admittedly, the longer the silence continued, the more nervous I became, and subtly decided to head back to my truck. Maybe I'd just sit in it for a little bit. On my way over to it, however, I stepped on some unusually squishy dirt and realized that I'd accidentally stepped on someone's freshly dug plot. Recoiling, I apologized to whoever had been laid to rest there, but as I examined where I'd stepped, I felt my heart sink. The gravesite was a freshly buried one for sure, since only a couple of nights before it had been a hole with warning tape around it, but it had been dug up again. From my position near the foot of the grave, I could see that the mound of dirt I'd stepped in was littered with splinters of wood and small shreds of fabric. Towards the head of it was a source of such items. The coffin had been dug down to and then broken into. Worse still was that I could hear something scratching around in there still, and I really just caught someone red-handed. Maybe they'd dug it wrong and actually couldn't get out in time when they heard me coming, so just decided to play it cool and hide in the hole. Straightening myself up and puffing out my chest to appear more intimidating, I prepared myself to confront the vandal. Never could I have imagined what I was about to see next. Looking into the hole with my flashlight, as the first inklings of light trickled into the sky, I froze. The thundering words I'd been mustering to tell this kid off died in my throat. Squatting down in the hole was a ragged, emaciated creature feasting on the recently deceased corpse that lay in the coffin. There wasn't any blood due to the embalming process, I assume, but chunks of flesh hung in shredded fashion from this thing's mouth and hands. It was no bigger than a child, with distinctly humanoid features. Though it had no hair or fur, its ears were elongated and pointed. When I shone the light onto it, it turned to face me. I saw the nocturnal pupils of its eyes shrink as it glared back at the light, and it started to raise itself up. Now, normally I'm a pretty fearless guy. This line of work, you see everything. Not this, though. I'd never, and hope to never again, see anything as depraved as this thing. Well, I'm not ashamed to say I sprinted faster than I thought my beer belly would ever allow, back to my truck. Behind me, I could hear the thing screeching like a banshee, but I didn't look back. Slamming the truck into drive, I took off like a bat out of hell and didn't look back. As it stands now, I'm going to meet with the town council later this afternoon. I'm not sure how I'm going to explain what I saw to them. I'd found its prints and assumed they'd had a reasonable cause, as any rational person would, as I'm sure the council will try to reason as well. What gives me the most indigestion about the whole thing is that for days I was walking around with that, whatever it was, stalking around with me in the dark.
Hey there. Thank you so much for taking the time to drop by and listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me. I put a lot of time and effort into making these videos, so it's nice to know that there's someone out there listening. Do me a little favor, would you? Click that like button, leave a comment, and if you really feel like it, why not subscribe too? Okay, happy tales everyone. See you soon.